Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover two topics. The first one's going to be the groundbreaking joint motion resolution passed by the European Parliament last night, and then we're going to move on to the very long interview that the Prime Minister gave 2 days ago. Let's go over what the joint motion resolution passed by the EU Parliament said last night. Start off with the language praising Armenia's pivot towards the EU and the West and away from Russia. It praises Armenia's democratic development. It comes out strongly in support of Armenia's territorial integrity. It praises Armenia's exit, essentially in so many words, out of CSTO, and specifically mentions the removal of the Russian border guards from our airport. And I think this is, behind the scenes, actually a significant issue for them, much more so than we thought. It denounces Azeri occupation of Armenian territory and demands their full withdrawal. And it also goes on to condemn EU leadership for their congratulations of Ilham Aliyev for his phony and fake election victory in Baku. Now let's move on to the most important part of this resolution, which was point 4, and I'm going to read it directly. It says, pursuant to Article 49, any European state may apply to become a member of the European Union, provided that it adheres to the Copenhagen criteria and the principles of democracy, respects fundamental freedoms, human minority rights, and upholds the rule of law. Consider that should Armenia be interested in applying for candidate status and continue its path of sustained reforms, consolidating its democracy, this could set the stage for a transformative phase in EU-Armenia relations. What this means in actual real political terms is the EU Parliament essentially putting its stamp of approval or its support for Armenia if it actually chooses to want to apply to join the European Union. Now, this comes at a time where over the last weekend, Armenian Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan, who's actually known to be quite cautious in his statements, said that Armenia is actually considering applying to join the European Union. And this is actually a very complicated matter. And the way this is coming about is this could be part of a coordinated dance between the two sides. We don't know that. I have no inside particular information, but it sort of seems like that. Then we move on to the other point of relevance, which is point 14. And this is what it says. The EU Parliament calls Azerbaijan to genuinely engage in a comprehensive and transparent dialogue with the Karabakh Armenians to ensure respect of their rights and guarantee of their security, including their right to return and to live in their homes in dignity and safety, under international presence, to be able to enjoy their lands, property rights, maintain their distinct identity, and fully enjoy their civic, cultural, and social and religious rights. And it also calls on Azerbaijan to release all of the illegally held prisoners in Baku. And it also calls for the immediate and full implementation of the International Court of Justice rulings that came down last year. In essence, what the EU Parliament is demanding is the minimal that we should be demanding, what the world should be demanding, that the Artsakh Armenians can go back to Artsakh, they can live with all of their rights and all of their protections, and most importantly, under international protection, not under the whims of the criminal regime in Baku. By the way, this statement by the EU Parliament puts the EU Parliament miles ahead of our own government when it comes to standing up for the rights of the Armenians of Artsakh. Now we're going to move on to point 8, which is in regards to national security and defense, and here what it says. The EU Parliament recognizes the importance and the need to strengthen the cooperation by the EU with Armenia in the field of security and defense, calls on the EU to respond favorably to Armenia's request for support via the European Peace Facility, which is their main funding, defense funding source, and to provide support for the Armenian military, and welcomes the actions by several member states to provide defensive support to Armenia, and urges member states to consider similar initiatives. This is essentially a call for everyone in the EU to open up to sell us weapons and continued military aid to Armenia for Armenia to be able to defend itself. Now let's move on to topic 2, which is the very long interview that the Prime Minister gave, covering many, many topics. What we're going to do here is we're actually going to go over the most important parts and say what he's saying and give it context on each point. And frankly, some of the stuff is so confusing, we're going to try to explain some of it to make it easier to understand. Question 1, which came, was It was like Azerbaijan wants 4 enclave villages. Let me give some context to this. There's 2 specific issues here. There are enclaves that were established during Soviet times in which there are multiple of Azeri enclaves inside of Armenia proper, and there's one very large Armenian enclave inside of Azerbaijan proper. Geographically, all of these essentially add up to nearly the same square kilometers. The only logical thing is to exchange them because of the endless problems that this could cause. There's no reason to have this, so that's obviously the most logical way to deal with this. Now, the 4 villages that are mentioned here, 3 of them are actually not in the enclaves. They're actually in this no man's land between the 2 countries, that if you actually demark the border, 3 of them are very likely to be on the Azeri side because they were originally Azeri villages to begin with. The 4th one is actually in the enclave.
Երբեք ոչ մի քննարկման ժամանակ խոսք չի եղել եւ խոսք չի կարող լինել Տավուշի մարզի որևէ գյուղ հանձնելու մասին։ Երբ որ ադրբեջանական մամուլում բարձրաձայնվում են գյուղերի անուններ, Հայաստանի Հանրապետության տարածքում երբեք այդպիսի անուններով գյուղեր չեն եղել։ Ոչ միայն խորհրդային ժամանակներում, այլև խորհրդային ժամանակներից հետո։ Խորհրդային միության փլուզման պահին Ալմատի հռչակագիրը դարձել է սահմանների եւ փոխադարձաբար միմյանց տարածքային ամբողջականությունը ճանաչելու հիմք։ Այդ ադմինիստրատիվ սահմանից ինչ որ գտնվում է դեպի այն կողմ, հա, Ադրբեջան է, ինչ գտնվում է դեպի այս կողմ, Հայաստան։ Բանակցային process-ներում երբեմն եղել է տպավորություն, թե մենք կարող ենք տարածքների այս սահմանի գծի վերականգնումից հետո կամ զուգընթաց տարածքների որոշակի փոխանակումներ անել, բայց ես տեսնում եմ, որ դա կարող է դեֆորմացնել գործընթացը եւ լրացուցիչ ռիսկեր բերել։ Այդ մեր կոմունիկացիաները, այդ հատվածները վերակառուցենք, որպեսզի Հայաստանի Հանրապետության բոլոր կոմունիկացիաները անցնեն Հայաստանի Հանրապետության բոլորը դե յուրե տարածքով։
In short, this is really nothing short of a disaster in so many ways because of the way he said it. He's asked about the enclaves. He's not actually asked about the enclaves. He's asked about these no man's land villages. And in the process, he manages to recognize the enclaves inside of Armenia as Azeri territory. A recognition that on the face of it is nonsensical, because when Azerbaijan declared its independence in 1991, they actually declared themselves the heir of the original 1918-1920 Azeri Republic at a time when there was absolutely no enclaves and actually no Artsakh within Azeri territory. If I was advising Ilham at this point, I would tell them to jump at this opportunity and sign anything that actually gives me the enclaves inside of Armenia, even if it means I need to give up mine. Why? Because, for 4 specific reasons. The first one, this is an unbelievable chance to further humiliate his primary enemy. It will get the West off of his back because he would have actually signed something. And once the enclaves are under Azeri control, they are actually an endless opportunity for further war and further aggression, because logically, if you have an enclave, what's the point of having the enclave if you don't have a road to it? If there's a road to it, who's going to guard the road to it? Who's going to guarantee the safety of the road? So the enclaves themselves are actually the best excuse to keep conflict and war going, and we are simply handing it to them at this point, as far as this issue is concerned, because fundamentally, the regime in Baku cannot survive without an Armenian enemy. And in this case, he can actually sign something and continue to have an Armenian enemy. Now let's move on to question 2, which was, when do you plan to remove the Russian border agents from Yerevan's airport?
Հայաստանի Հանրապետության սահմանապահ զորքերը նամակով դիմել են Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում Ռուսաստանի Դաշնության սահմանապահ զորքերին, շնորհակալություն են հայտնել մատուցված ծառայության համար, տեղեկացրել են, որ քանի որ մեր երկրում պետական ինստիտուտները զարգանում են, Հայաստանի Հանրապետության սահմանապահ ծառայությունը մասնավորապես Զվարթնոց օդանավակայանում արդեն իսկ բավարար փորձ, հմտություն եւ հնարավորություններ է ձեռք բերել, որպեսզի Զվարթնոց օդանավակայանում սահմանապահ հսկողությունը իրականացնի առանց ռուսական կողմի աջակցության.
this is all for the good. This removal of the Russian border guards from the airport is supposed to take place in August. And overall, this is a very good thing in the progress of the country. Let's move on to question 3. Are there any plans for Armenia and Azerbaijan to drop the lawsuits against each other in international courts?
Եթե կողմերը կնքում են խաղաղության պայմանագիր, ինչ են շարունակում իրավական պատերազմները իրար դեմ։ Իսկ եթե չեն կնքում խաղաղության պայմանագիր, Հայաստանի Հանրապետության համար դա մի գործոն է, որը կարևոր է նաև մեր ասելիքը եւ մեր օրակարգ առաջ մղելու համար։
In interpreting this, it makes complete tactical sense to actually hold these ICC filings that the regime actually fears against the Aliyev regime. But frankly, this sort of Damocles will be there whether you file it or you don't file it, because one, they fear you filing it. And second of all, if you file it and they carry out aggression in response to filing, it actually makes the case far stronger against them. So the only thing to do is to actually immediately file against them as soon as we have all the relevant evidence. One, about the war crimes that committed in Armenia, on Armenia proper in September of 22, and obviously the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that they carried out in September of 23. And from a moral and historical point of view, not filing these charges with the ICC would actually be a monstrous act, because in essence, what it would mean is that we put our official stamp of approval on the second Armenian genocide. Question 4. When will they return all the POWs, and what does Azerbaijan want in return? It's hard to know if this is accurate or not. I've heard contradictory things. I don't doubt that work is being done on this front. The issue is how much of a priority it is. And when you separate it, or you agree to separate this from the broader peace negotiations, it was a huge mistake, because what leverage does anyone have to free them? Do we have to free them if they are separated from an overall understanding or an overall deal to finalize all matters? Question 5. What is happening in Armenia-Russia relations? Russia wants us to clarify whether we are still part of the CSTO or not. This is the Prime Minister's own words.
Եթե հավաքական անվտանգության պայմանագրի կազմակերպությունը կպատասխանի այդ հարցին, եւ այդ պատասխանը կհամապատասխանի մեր պատկերացումներին, այդ կնշանակի, որ Հայաստանի եւ հավաքական անվտանգության պայմանագրի կազմակերպության միջև հարցերը հաստատագրված են, լուծված են, ամփոփված են։ Եթե ոչը, Հայաստանը դուրս կգա հապկից։ Երբ չեմ կարող ասել։
Frankly, he's 100% correct on this, and he's actually doing the proper thing, which is calling the Russians out. Why should we be part of a defense organization that prevents us from having military relations with the rest of the world, most specifically the West, when it offers us absolutely no level of security? Now we're going to go to the last section of the interview, where he just went off on these long dialogues, covering many topics, some of them actually explosive. The first one being is in a statement, he accused, first of all, he accused Azerbaijan very clearly of committing ethnic cleansing in Karabakh, which is obviously true. And then he accused the Russians of trying to organize a coup at that time against his government. And he said that they wanted to use the refugees from Artsakh that were fleeing to Armenia as resources to carry out the coup. This is obviously partially true. The Russians were actually hoping that the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh will actually lead to regime change and directional change in Armenia. But the reality is that it entirely backfired on them, and right now they are the ones primarily being blamed outside of the regime in Baku for the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Artsakh. And also this notion that people who just escaped with their lives are going to be some kind of a political battering ram for anyone's purposes is sort of an absurd idea on the face of it. The second point that he made was the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, according to him, was already resolved in 1996 with the final nail being put in its place in 2016. In reality, the best we could achieve was autonomy within Azerbaijan as stated in 1996, but no Armenian official dared to publicly admit this. On this one, this is patently not true. We know that the 2001 Key West agreement that Ilham Aliyev's dad agreed to and then walked away from actually allowed for complete independence for Artsakh and joining of Armenia. And in the 1997 proposals, actually essentially had de facto independence for Artsakh, even though de jure is going to be part of Aliyev's state. And most importantly, in 2007, in the Madrid principles that were agreed to by Azerbaijan, they actually agreed to the right of the people in Artsakh to actually hold a referendum to decide their fate. In conclusion, what is disturbing to me here are not his comments about the enclaves of this village or that village, since in all likelihood Ilham will never sign any agreement, even if we give in to his demands to change our national anthem to the Beatles' "I'm a Loser," since no peace agreement actually serves his personal interests, which all has to do with the preservation of the regime. What is disturbing to me is the Prime Minister's belief that, one, concessions will bring us peace, when frankly they've only brought us war and humiliation. And secondly, and more importantly, that a signed agreement or a piece of paper signed with this mafia state in Baku is actually worth the paper that it is written on. Peace, like political power, grows out of a barrel of a gun. Thank you for joining me this episode of Insights.
Oh, Superman, where are you now?